You know, you really do look weak in person. Her voice carried across the table, sharp enough that nearby diners actually turned. She tapped her polished nail against the wine glass, as if the sound of it could hammer her point harder. She wasn't whispering. She wanted him and everyone else to hear exactly what she thought of the man sitting opposite her. The insult hung in the air a second too long. He didn't react, didn't shrink, didn't even look offended. He just breathed in once, steady and practiced. The kind of breath a man takes when he's bracing for something bigger than humiliation. The room felt tight with judgment, but he remained still, hands folded, gaze steady. And before I show you the exact moment when a stranger burst through those lobby doors, before the smoke, before the screams, you need to know why he stayed this calm, even while being dismissed in front of a crowd. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. Because this isn't a story about a bad date. It's about the strength people overlook until the moment it saves their lives. He didn't say anything right away. That was his quiet rebellion silence instead of bite. Even now, facing someone who clearly felt her status gave her the right to assess him like a defective product, he only straightened the cuff of his work shirt. Not nervous, just composed. Evan had arrived still wearing half his maintenance uniform because he'd rushed from a late repair job. The hotel staff knew him as the guy who fixed everything without complaints, always polite, always steady. But sitting here, framed by candlelight and luxury decor, he looked painfully out of place next to a woman polished from head to ambition. He didn't care about that. What he cared about was the 8-year-old waiting at home, probably falling asleep on the couch with a book open on his chest again. That little boy was why he'd agreed to this blind date at all. His sister insisted he deserved a chance at something beyond work and parenting. Miranda Holt, however, clearly had not received the same briefing about kindness. She leaned forward, lowering her tone now that she'd made her public point. I mean, a maintenance technician? My assistant must have been joking when she set this up. I run Holt Dynamics. I negotiate with companies worth more than your building. He didn't flinch. The quiet inside him was older than hotel shifts and blind dates. It came from a different life, a life no one here could guess from his worn boots or the way he kept his shoulders relaxed. Years of training had carved that calm into his bones. Years of learning when to push, when to stand down, when to breathe so the world didn't shake. He gave her a small nod as if acknowledging her words without accepting their weight. I understand if this isn't what you expected. His tone wasn't weak. It was steady, neutral, almost clinical in restraint. Miranda misread that. She mistook discipline for submission. She huffed a short laugh. Expected? No. Not even close. My time is valuable. You could have at least tried to look the part. Somewhere behind them, dishes clattered as a waiter stumbled. A small commotion rippled close to the lobby doors. Evan heard it before she did, sharp instinct twitching beneath the stillness. He turned slightly, not enough to alarm her, just enough to check the source. A pair of security guards moved fast across the marble floor, hands on radios, brows tight with urgency. Something had shifted in the atmosphere, something wrong. Miranda didn't notice. She was too busy describing the types of men she usually dated, emphasizing each luxury accent like a badge: pilots, founders, investors. Each detail widened the canyon of class between them. He caught only fragments of her monologue because his attention had already split, half focused on her words, half scanning the room, the way he always did when tension hummed faintly in the air. Old instincts didn't die, they slept with one eye open. A staff member bumped into a chair, nearly dropping a tray. Another hurried toward the service hallway, whispering into a headset. The pattern was unmistakable. He recognized it long before chaos ever reached a civilian's eyes. Something was happening. He adjusted in his seat, posture sharpening almost imperceptibly. Miranda finally noticed. What? Now you're nervous? No, he said quietly. Just listening. To what? She scoffed. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The room was shifting around them, but she couldn't feel the tremor rising beneath the evening's surface. She rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed he was no longer fully focused on her. You know, this attitude isn't helping you. Weak and distracted? Bad combination. He didn't correct her. Calm wasn't for her benefit, it was preparation. Another staff member rushed past them, breathless. Security near the entrance stiffened as something caught their attention. And as Miranda reached for her wine again, oblivious, a faint thud echoed from outside the glass doors. He heard it like a trigger. He angled his head slightly and murmured, "We should stay alert." She scoffed again. "Yo, please. If anything actually happened, real professionals would handle it." He didn't smile. He didn't argue. He simply observed the lobby, breath anchored deep in his chest, waiting for the shift he already sensed coming. Because real professionals sometimes work in uniforms she'd never respect until the moment they're the only thing standing between her and danger. He stayed perfectly still as another distant thud vibrated through the lobby floor, soft, but carrying that strange heaviness the human body recognizes before the mind does. Miranda didn't flinch. She was too wrapped in her own irritation, swirling her wine as if the movement could smooth over the unease spreading around them. But he heard the shift in footsteps, the tightening of voices, the rising static across security radios. A server hurried past, nearly colliding with their table, eyes wide and unfocused. He steadied the tray for her before it tipped. She mumbled an apology and darted toward the service corridor. That small interaction told him more than the noise itself. Staff weren't trained for concealment. Fear leaked through their movements before words ever did. Miranda sighed dramatically. "This is ridiculous. First, I get set up with someone who can't even dress properly, and now the service is falling apart. What next?" He didn't answer. His gaze stayed fixed on the lobby entrance. 3 security officers moved in a triangle formation toward the main doors, not slow, not casual, purposeful. Controlled urgency. A pattern he knew intimately from a different life. He rose halfway from his chair without thinking, muscles tightening with old readiness. Miranda frowned sharply. "Sit down. You're embarrassing yourself." Another muffled impact came from outside. This one she heard. She jolted slightly before trying to mask it with a steady sip of wine. "What? What was that?" He didn't sit. "We should be ready to move." "For what?" Her voice cracked before she caught it. He scanned the lobby again, guests whispering, a mother pulling her child closer, a businessman clutching his phone like a shield. The air carried that strange pressure, a room preparing for something no one had named yet. "I don't like your tone," Miranda said, trying to reclaim control through sharpness. "You're making it sound like something is wrong." He didn't soften his voice. "Something is wrong." The glass doors rattled violently. This time the entire room heard it. A hush fell, not silence, but that tight, collective inhale shared by strangers sensing the same danger. Security rushed forward, hands on holsters, forming a barrier between guests and the entrance. Miranda pressed back in her seat, finally shaken. Is this normal?" "No," he said simply. He stepped around the table, positioning himself between her and the lobby doors. The action was instinctive, not dramatic, not heroic. Just precise placement, the way he'd done hundreds of times during evacuations, raids, and medical extractions. Calm under fire was a habit, not a choice. The doors exploded inward. A man barreled through, shoving glass and metal as though the framework weighed nothing. Shouts erupted. People scrambled in every direction. The attacker tossed a small metal cylinder across the floor. It rolled, clicked twice, and dissolved into a cloud of thick white smoke that swallowed half the lobby. Screams fractured the room. Miranda froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She wasn't the only one. Dozens of guests lost orientation instantly as smoke blurred their vision and panic smothered logic. He reacted before thought. He grabbed Miranda's arm, steady but not harsh. "Move now." She couldn't. Her heels skidded against the marble as she tried to stand, breath shallow. She was powerful in meetings, confident in boardrooms, but here, in real danger, she was untrained and unprepared. He dragged a chair aside, creating space, and nudged her behind a support column as security tried and failed to form an organized response. The smoke disoriented them. Their radios crackled uselessly. He scanned for children first. Always children. It was instinct from long hours in triage under fire, searching for the smallest silhouettes. He spotted a boy crying near the reception desk, clutching a backpack nearly bigger than himself. No adult near him. No cover protecting him. He moved. Miranda shouted after him, voice cracking with fear. He didn't turn. The column shielded her for the moment. The boy had nothing. As he ran, he grabbed a heavy maintenance flashlight from a fallen Carde tool he'd used every day, suddenly essential. It wasn't a weapon, but it was solid enough to break glass, redirect crowds, or create signals through smoke. A simple object, humble, but powerful in the right hands. He slid across the floor, catching the boy before a panicked man tripped over him. "I've got you," he murmured, voice steady, grounding the child through tone alone. The boy clung to him instantly, shaking. Security attempted to rush the attacker, but smoke blinded them. The man swung wildly, knocking one to the ground. He shifted the boy onto his hip and navigated toward a temporary shelter point-of-service alcove he knew well from maintenance rounds. He set the child down gently and crouched to meet his gaze. "Stay here. Don't move until I come back." The boy's tears streaked through soot. He nodded. Miranda, still behind the column, watched everything. Her earlier insult echoed in her mind like a cruel joke. Weak. She called him weak. He was the only person moving with precision. He surveyed the lobby again, mapping movements, identifying choke points. His brain slipped into its old rhythm: assess, stabilize, redirect. Miranda managed to whisper, barely audible. How do you know what to do?" He didn't answer. Not because he refused to, but because an injured woman crawled into view, dragging herself with trembling arms. He ran to her, sliding onto his knees, checking her vitals with muscle memory older than his hotel badge. Another scream tore through the haze. Miranda shivered behind her column, gripping it like a lifeline. And for the first time, she understood. She wasn't the one evaluating him anymore. The world was, and he was rising to meet it. He checked the woman's breathing, 2 fingers against her neck, counting the pulses beneath smoke-thickened air. Shallow but present. Her leg was bleeding, not from a gunshot, more like from shattered glass when the doors blew inward. He tore a strip from the linen tablecloth beside her and wrapped it tightly around her calf. The motions were clean, efficient, the sort of movements that came from training repeated until it lived in muscle, not memory. She tried to speak, coughing on smoke. He pressed a steady hand to her shoulder. "Save your breath. You're stable for now." His voice carried the same calm the boy had clung to moments earlier. Another blast of panic rippled through the lobby as silhouettes scattered. The smoke was thinning just enough for shapes to become visible: security officers struggling to regain formation, guests stumbling blindly, the attacker pacing erratically as if looking for someone specific. That unpredictability was the real danger. A target-driven threat was bad, an unfocused one was worse. Miranda remained behind her pillar, trembling, eyes wide and glistening with the dawning realization that she had misread everything about this man. She watched him tear his own sleeve to finish bandaging the woman's leg. She watched him check the attacker's position without panic. She watched him stay level while chaos swallowed the room. Another thud echoed something heavy thrown across the floor. Instinct snapped through him. He turned toward the alcove where he'd left the child, checking for movement. The boy was still there, knees pulled to chest, clutching his backpack like a shield. Good, but the attacker was shifting direction, now less wandering, more focused. His gaze tracked across the room toward the elevators. That was bad. The elevators were where dozens of guests had fled, believing they'd find safety inside. If he reached them, he rose swiftly. "Stay low," he told the injured woman. "Help is coming." He moved with the controlled stride of someone who had once navigated far worse environments: combat zones, collapsed structures, burning compounds. His boots were quiet on the marble, his flashlight clenched not as a weapon but as a tool, ready for whatever he needed it to become. Security tried to regroup, but the smoke and panic fractured their communication. Their radios were failing, static roaring through every attempt at order. One officer shouted for others to fall back, but another believed he meant advance. Miscommunication splintered their efforts. He understood the pattern instantly. This was what happened when a team relied on systems instead of instincts. When one failure took the whole structure down. He moved past the toppled chairs and spilled drinks, stepping around a falling chandelier ornament knocked loose by a fleeing guest. He approached 2 officers who were struggling to orient themselves. One waved frantic instructions. "Sir, get back. We need you to evacuate with the others." "Evacuation routes are compromised," he said calmly. "Smoke is driving civilians into choke points. You need containment, not retreat." The officers hesitated. His certainty unsettled them, not because it was wrong, but because it sounded like someone who had handled live threats before. "You a cop?" one asked through a cough. "No," he glanced toward the attacker, "but I've been here before." The officer opened his mouth to question further, but another scream tore through the lobby, a piercing cry from the far end, where a group of guests had been cornered by toppled tables. The attacker turned toward the sound. He didn't think. He acted. He cut across the room, stepping between overturned chairs and spilled silverware. Miranda watched him go, the shape of him disappearing into the thinning smoke. For the first time, she understood that she had judged someone without knowing the smallest truth about him. The attacker lunged toward the cluster of terrified guests. He grabbed a chair and hurled it aside. One woman stumbled backwards, tripping over a fallen lamp. Another man tried to shield her with shaking arms. He reached them in seconds. He didn't tackle the attacker, not yet. Not without understanding the man's pattern. Instead, he used his flashlight beam, shining it directly into the attacker's eyes. The sudden burst of light made the man flinch, raising his arm in reflex. That half-second of interruption was enough. "Move!" he commanded the group behind him. They scrambled away in a stumbling rush. He walked backward, keeping his beam steady, using the flashlight not as a weapon but as a directional tool control through disorientation. The attacker swung blindly. The blow grazed his arm, but he didn't break position. Pain was secondary. The objective was primary. Security finally caught up behind him. "We can take it from here. You'll lose more people if someone doesn't block the elevator access," he said. "How do you know that?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His eyes flicked toward the elevator bank, then to the attacker's shifting stance. The threat was telegraphing his intention, and he read it like a language he hadn't forgotten. One officer swallowed hard. "Who are you?" Before he could respond, Miranda yelled from across the room, voice shaking with something between fear and awe. "He knows what he's doing. Listen to him." He didn't turn to her. He didn't take credit. He simply took the next step forward, angling himself to intercept the attacker's path before he could reach the elevators. The smoke thinned more. The attacker's silhouette sharpened. Guests clung to walls, trembling. The boy in the alcove watched with wide, terrified eyes. He steadied his breath. He centered his weight. And as the attacker roared and charged toward the elevator corridor, he moved to cut him off, not with anger, not with bravado, but with the calm certainty of a man who had once held lives in his hands and refused to let go. The crisis had only begun. He stepped directly into the attacker's path, feet planted, shoulders relaxed, flashlight angled low so it wouldn't blind him but could be used the moment the man lunged. The attacker barreled forward with wild momentum, swinging a metal rod in a vicious arc aimed straight at his head. He pivoted, catching the blow across his forearm instead of his skull, redirecting it just enough that the attacker stumbled past him and slammed into the elevator doors. The metallic crash echoed through the lobby. Guests screamed. Someone cried for help. Security tried to regain formation, but the smoke disoriented them, creating shadows that looked like threats and threats that looked like shadows. He didn't waste the second the misdirection bought him. He grabbed a caution sign stand from the floor, lightweight plastic, but angled enough to serve as an improvised barrier, and stepped forward, placing it between the attacker and the terrified guests behind him. The goal wasn't to fight. It was to redirect, contain, and buy civilians time to move. "Back up," he told the group, voice steady and clipped. "Stay against the wall and go left." Now, they obeyed instantly. Fear made them compliant. His calm made them believe him without question. The attacker pushed off the elevator doors, shaking his head like a furious animal recovering from disorientation. His eyes locked on the moving crowd again. He roared and charged. He kept the barrier angled. The attacker slammed into it, knocking him back a step but not off balance. The plastic cracked but held long enough for him to twist sideways and shove the attacker away from the crowd. Not a strike, just a controlled redirection, the exact kind he'd practiced on uncooperative trainees years ago. Miranda watched from behind her column, her chest rising and falling in shaky bursts. She couldn't tear her eyes away. Everything she'd said earlier stabbed at her, sharp with shame. The man she'd dismissed was controlling the room better than her entire executive team handled quarterly crises. The attacker swung the metal rod again, this time catching the side of his ribs. Pain flared, hot and immediate, but he didn't retreat. He absorbed the impact with a grunt, grabbed the attacker's wrist, and twisted just enough to loosen his grip. The rod clattered onto the marble. Security hesitated, unsure whether to intervene or hold back. One officer started forward. He held up a hand without looking at him. "Get civilians out of direct line. He's unpredictable. Don't rush him." His tone wasn't commanding, but it carried the weight of someone who'd given orders under fire. The attacker lunged again, this time trying to reach the boy in the alcove. The child screamed. That sound cut through smoke, fear, and distance sharp enough to trigger something deep inside him. He surged forward, gripping the attacker's arm and dragging him sideways before he could reach the child. They slammed into a toppled luggage cart, metal rattling loudly. The attacker clawed at him, but he kept his center of gravity low, forcing the man's weight off balance. He wasn't trying to restrain him permanently, just long enough for security to reposition. "Get the kid," he called out. A staff member, shaking but responsive, reached into the alcove and pulled the boy into a safer corner. The child kept his eyes locked on him, terrified but trusting. The attacker wriggled free and scrambled to his feet, grabbing a shard of broken glass from the floor. It wasn't a weapon with reach, but desperation made it dangerous. The man slashed wildly. He stepped back, controlling distance, eyes constantly sweeping entrances, exits, security patterns, civilian clusters, potential fall zones. This was the kind of situational awareness he never talked about, the kind that came from nights spent stabilizing wounded soldiers while chaos exploded around him. He saw everything at once: the direction of smoke drift, the limp in the attacker's left leg, the weakened arm that held the glass shard, the way his breathing was ragged enough to predict bursts of energy followed by collapse. He didn't need weapons. He had knowledge. The attacker rushed forward again. He sidestepped, grabbed the man's wrist, and twisted sharply. The shard fell. He kicked it aside before it could be used again. Security finally saw an opening. 2 officers moved forward with cuffs, trying to pin the attacker. But the man thrashed with unpredictable strength, nearly overpowering them. The struggle turned into a dangerous tangle. One officer pinned awkwardly, the other losing grip. He moved in without hesitation. He slipped behind the attacker, locked an arm around his elbow, and applied controlled pressure, just enough leverage to destabilize the man without causing permanent damage. It was a maneuver born from countless drills, the kind soldiers learned so they could subdue without escalation in civilian environments. "Hold him," he told the officers. This time they obeyed instantly. Together they forced the attacker onto the floor, securing his wrists with cuffs. As soon as the threat was contained, he stepped back, chest heaving quietly, ribs throbbing from the earlier strike. Smoke thinned enough to reveal his face clearly focused, alert, unshaken. Miranda stared at him like she'd never actually seen him before. The officer beside him finally found his voice. "Sir, you're not just maintenance, are you?" He didn't answer. His gaze swept the room again, ensuring no new dangers surfaced. Because the crisis wasn't over, not until every civilian was safe. And he could already see a new problem forming near the North Corridor, where more guests were trapped behind fallen debris. He turned toward it without hesitation. He moved toward the North Corridor, ribs aching with every step, but his focus sharpened instead of wavering. The debris blocking the hallway was a mix of toppled shelving, fallen decorations, and a broken service cart that had been knocked sideways when the crowd rushed earlier. Behind it, he could hear crying several voices, one distinctly that of a woman trying to calm someone younger. He crouched beside the blockage, testing its weight. Too heavy to lift alone in one piece. But there were angles he could break down, edges he could shift. Years of navigating collapsed structures in combat zones had taught him that debris was rarely one object. It was a puzzle disguised as chaos. "Security," one officer called from behind. "We need you back here." He didn't turn. "There are civilians trapped. This is priority." Another officer jogged up, panting. "We already called fire rescue." "They're 10 minutes out." "They don't have 10 minutes, he said, still analyzing the structure. "Help me move this top section." The officer hesitated only a second before stepping beside him. Together they shouldered the upper panel of wood, shifting it enough to create a gap. Dust drifted down. Someone inside coughed painfully. "It's collapsing." A girl's voice sobbed from the other side. "It's stable," he called back, voice steady enough to cut through panic. "I'm right here. We're getting you out." The officer looked at him again the same way others had been looking all night, like they were seeing a version of him that didn't fit the uniform he wore. But they didn't question him now, not after watching him subdue the attacker, not after witnessing the way he read danger like a language. They cleared the smallest section first, enough for him to slide through at an angle. He squeezed between the debris and wall until he entered the cramped pocket of space where 3 people were stranded. A woman with a bleeding forehead, a middle-aged man holding his arm awkwardly, and a girl no older than 13, shaking uncontrollably. He knelt beside the woman, assessing her wound. Forehead cuts always bleed more than they should, but she was conscious, pupils responsive. He tore another strip of fabric his shirt was nearly in shreds by now and pressed it against her wound. "You're going to be okay," he said softly. The middle-aged man winced, trying to adjust his arm. "I think it's broken. Don't move it," he instructed. "We'll stabilize it before moving you." The girl clutched her own hands so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Are we trapped? Are we going to be stuck here until the building collapses?" His voice was firm but kind. "Nothing is collapsing. You're scared, not stuck." Her breathing hitched, rapid and shallow. He recognized the early signs of hyperventilation. "What's your name?" he asked. "Emily." "Emily, I need you to match my breathing, all right? Watch me." He inhaled deeply, slow, controlled, steady. He made sure she saw the rise of his chest. She tried to mimic him. The first attempt shook. The second settled. By the third, her breath synced with his. The woman whispered, "You're good with people." He didn't respond. This wasn't about conversation. It was about keeping them mentally anchored while he made a plan. He looked back toward the opening. "I need 2 more officers here," he called out. "We're going to lift the largest panel on my count." Security scrambled to gather. Miranda, still half hidden behind her column, watched him with wide eyes. She had not moved, not because she was glued in place by fear, but because she couldn't stop staring at the man who kept walking into danger without hesitation. He guided Emily through another breathing pattern before turning to the injured man. "We need to immobilize your arm." "With what?" the man asked, grimacing. He scanned the debris pile. Broken wood, metal rods, wires. Too sharp, too unstable. But then he spotted it, the maintenance flashlight still clipped at his belt. Solid, smooth, the perfect width. He pulled it free. This. He wrapped the man's arm with another torn strip of fabric, securing the flashlight alongside it as a temporary splint. The man groaned at the pressure but nodded. "Thank you." He positioned the injured woman and Emily for extraction. The space was tight, but if the debris shifted upward instead of outward, they could crawl through one by one. He crawled back toward the opening and signaled to the officers. "Lift on my mark. Slow, controlled. Do not jerk." One officer nodded. "Ready. 3, 1, they heaved upward. The debris lifted enough to widen the gap. He guided Emily first, placing her hands exactly where they needed to go so she wouldn't slip. She crawled through the gap, stumbling into the arms of a waiting staff member. The woman followed, then the injured man slower, groaning but workable. Once they were out, he allowed the officers to lower the debris again. Stability mattered more than speed now. Emily rushed to him, arms wrapping around his waist in a trembling hug. He froze for a moment, surprised, then rested a gentle hand on her back. "You're safe," he murmured. Her mother thanked him repeatedly, tears streaking her cheeks. The man with the broken arm managed a weak smile. "You're one hell of a technician." He didn't correct him. Miranda stepped closer now, drawn not by obligation but something deeper, recognition, maybe gratitude, maybe regret. You just saved them." He didn't look at her. His gaze was already sweeping the lobby again. There were still more people, more risks, more places danger could strike, and he was already moving toward the next one. He moved through the lobby with the same precision he'd shown from the first second danger entered the building, scanning corners, exits, crowd clusters, and the shifting positions of security officers who still looked unsure whether to follow their protocols or follow him. Smoke lingered in uneven pockets, drifting lower now as ventilation systems finally caught up. The echoes of earlier screams still pulsed through the space, layered with muffled crying and the frantic whispers of people trying to comfort each other. He didn't slow. Every second counted. A security officer jogged alongside him, breathless. "Sir, wait, what exactly are you trained in?" "Nobody moves like that unless focus on the room," he replied calmly. The threat wasn't acting alone. His behavior pattern is too erratic for a single objective attack. The officer stiffened. You think there's another one? I think we prepare for anything. His tone wasn't speculation, it was assessment. In his past life, assuming the threat was neutralized was how people died. He scanned the room again, noting the clusters of frightened guests huddled behind overturned furniture. Some were tending to minor injuries, some were frozen entirely. He approached one of the remaining security staff older, more seasoned. I need the building schematics in your head. Where are your blind spots? Service corridors? Maintenance shafts? The man blinked, startled that someone outside the department would ask so specifically. Blind spots, East Service Tunnel janitorial corridor behind the banquet room, and the side stairwell has terrible camera coverage. Then we check those first. The officer hesitated. Not in disagreement, just in disbelief at the way this man, dressed in a scuffed maintenance shirt and bruised from earlier blows, was assessing their job with more clarity than their own head of security. Before they could move, a small voice called out from behind a toppled drink station. It was the boy from the alcove, Noah. He was still trembling, but no longer frozen. He held the backpack tightly against his chest. Sir, the man... He said something. He crouched beside the boy. What did he say? He said he wasn't done. He said someone else was coming. A ripple of tension shot through the security staff nearby. He nodded once. Thank you. That's very helpful. He placed a steady hand on Noah's shoulder. Stay with the staff. They'll keep you safe. Noah's small fingers clung to his sleeve for a second before letting go. When he stood again, Miranda was watching him. Not distantly. Not fearfully. Intently. The way someone watches a truth rearrange their entire understanding of another person. How did you... She paused, swallowing hard. How did you stay so calm with him? With the children? He didn't answer. Not because he wanted to hide anything, but because her question didn't matter right now. The room full of crying families mattered. The trapped guests mattered. The security breaches mattered. And the possibility of a second threat mattered most. He headed toward the Eastern Service Corridor, the officer following close behind. The hallway was dim, lit by emergency lights casting a dull red glow. Smoke drifted along the ceiling in thin waves. The narrowness of the corridor made every footstep echo. He slowed as he approached a corner. The officer behind him nearly ran into his back. Don't rush corners, he murmured. How do you, the officer, started? But then he turned the corner himself, body angled, eyes scanning the entire space before committing to entry. The corridor was empty, but a storage door halfway down hung slightly ajar, a streak of black smudge marking the handle. He approached it carefully. Inside, 2 staff members were huddled on the floor, coughing from residual smoke. A fallen shelf had nearly pinned them, but they were conscious. He helped lift the shelving unit off their legs and guided them out into clearer air. Someone shoved us in there, one of them wheezed. Didn't see who, he nodded once. Get to the lobby. Medics will be here soon. He moved again, pushing deeper into the service tunnel. This was where he belonged, not at a dinner table being judged for what he wasn't, but in the quiet corners of chaos where clarity was rare and priceless. Miranda appeared at the end of the corridor, breath shaky from running. You can't just disappear into the hallways. You could get hurt, I am aware, he said without turning. She stopped a few steps behind him, watching the way he moved methodically, efficiently, with a discipline she'd only ever seen in military documentaries or leadership seminars featuring people far above her pay grade. He reached the end of the service corridor. It opened into a loading area with a partially rolled-up metal shutter. Cold air seeped through the gap night air. He crouched, touching the ground near the shutter. Footprints. Fresh. One set leading in, one set leading out. He tightened his jaw, thinking through the implications. If the attacker had an accomplice, this was where they'd slipped in or out, and if they'd gone back outside, they might not be finished. Behind him, the head of security finally caught up, flanked by 2 staff members. What do you have? He stepped aside so they could see the tracks. Your perimeter is compromised. Someone entered or exited during the first attack. The director's face drained of color. We didn't get the alarm for this door. The system must have failed during the smoke detonation, he finished. The director swallowed hard. How the hell do you know all this? Before he could respond, one of the officers beside the director spoke quietly. Because he's trained. More than trained. Miranda's eyes widened. The director's voice was lower now, less defensive, more fearful of the truth they'd missed. "Who are you?" He didn't brag. He didn't flex. He didn't give them his old title. He simply said, "Someone who's not letting anyone else get hurt tonight." Without waiting for another question, he stood and headed back toward the lobby to prepare the next safeguard. Because the crisis wasn't resolved, it was entering its next phase. He re-entered the lobby at a controlled pace, eyes adjusting instantly to the shifting light. The smoke had thinned, but the emotional haze was heavier now. Fear, confusion, exhaustion all mixing into a tense silence broken only by whispered questions and the distant wail of approaching sirens outside. Guests huddled together in tight circles. Some were trembling. Some were bleeding. All were waiting for someone to tell them what to do. And somehow, without title or badge, that someone was him. He stepped into the center of the lobby, scanning every corner again. The head of security trailed behind, clutching his radio like a lifeline, while a few officers waited for direction the way rookies look to veteran sergeants when the real world didn't match their training manuals. The director took a breath. If there's a second attacker, where do you think they'll go next? Another entrance? They might try not the entrance, he said quietly. The elevators. Miranda, still lingering behind a column, frowned. Why would they go there again? He pointed slightly upward, toward the mezzanine area above the lobby. Because the first attacker went straight for crowd zones. It wasn't random. It was pattern-driven. You interrupt visibility, then herd panic toward choke points. Elevators and stairwells are bottlenecks. If someone else wanted to maximize chaos, they'd target the same weakness. The director stared at him with a dawning realization. You've done this before. He didn't confirm it. He simply moved toward the elevator bank, footsteps quick but controlled. The closer he got, the more details he noticed, small things, overlooked by civilians but glaring to someone trained for situational reading. A suitcase still smoking from where it had been thrown earlier. A pool of spilled juice mixing with glass shards. A light fixture dangling by a single wire, swaying faintly from the earlier impact. He stepped over it and approached the largest elevator. The doors were slightly misaligned ajar by less than an inch, something most people wouldn't notice. But he did. "Back up," he called out, lifting a hand. Security stepped behind him instantly. He crouched, pressing his palm lightly against the slight opening. Warm air pulsed from inside, not from fire, but from movement. Someone was inside the shaft area. "Someone forced this door," he murmured. Miranda gasped softly behind him. He angled his body to peer through the gap. Darkness, a faint metallic clang, the unmistakable scrape of a boot sole shifting on a narrow platform. Not a trapped civilian. Someone waiting. He straightened slowly. "We need to lock down this entire elevator zone. Now." The director lifted his radio. "All officers secure the perimeter around the elevators." Moo. While security spread out, he followed a different instinct. Not brute force. Not immediate confrontation. Strategy. He touched the control panel, noting the disabled lights manual override, likely done quickly and sloppily. He knew exactly what that meant. "Someone's preparing an ambush," he said. "How can you be sure?" Miranda whispered. He didn't turn toward her. "Because this is how you trap responders." The director's breath hitched. "You think they're waiting for us to open it?" "Yes. They want chaos to restart." Miranda pressed a hand to her mouth. "Then what do we do?" He didn't hesitate. "We bypass the trap. Use the service stairwell behind the banquet hall to approach from the upper access door." The director blinked. "The one for technicians only?" He nodded. "Exactly. They won't expect anyone coming from above." One of the younger officers shook his head. "But those doors require a coded keycard. They're locked down after hours." He stared at him a moment, then tapped the side pocket of his shirt. "I have one." The officers exchanged confused glances. Miranda's eyebrows shot up. "You have access to secure floors?" He didn't respond. He didn't need to. His job as a maintenance technician granted access to every service tunnel, stairwell, storage facility, and emergency hatch in the entire hotel. Places even executives didn't know existed. Places where danger could hide and safety could be built. He moved toward the banquet hall corridor without waiting for questions. The director followed, breath uneven. Miranda hesitated at first, but something in her shifted an internal pull she didn't fully understand yet. She stepped forward. "Wait, don't go alone." He didn't slow his pace, then keep up. They followed him down the dim service hallway. Dust drifted from the ceiling where vibrations from earlier impacts had unsettled loose plaster. The air tasted slightly metallic, the way enclosed spaces did when adrenaline filled them. At the end of the hall, he reached the reinforced door. The lock beeped softly when he swiped his keycard. The door opened with a metallic click. The stairwell was narrow, lit by flickering emergency lights. He stepped inside. The director and 2 officers flanked him. Miranda stayed near the doorway, torn between fear and the magnetic pull of understanding the truth about this man. He climbed quickly but silently, placing each foot carefully to avoid echo. At the 3rd landing, he stopped abruptly and lifted a hand. Everyone froze. A soft clang vibrated through the wall, then a voice-low male muttering curses beneath his breath. The second attacker wasn't in the elevator shaft. He was in the service landing above them, setting up something. The director whispered, "What's he doing?" "Improvising," he murmured. "Setting a device or blocking escape routes. Either way, we intercept now." He pointed to one officer. "Cover the left side." To the director, "When I move, you follow." To the second officer, "Block the staircase behind us." He didn't bark orders. He delivered them the way a person does who has led before, who knows how to guide others through fear without feeding it. Then he moved, climbing the last steps with deliberate, silent precision. At the top, he paused, listening. A clatter, a grunt, a sharp metallic snap. He burst through the final turn, grabbing the second attacker before the man even realized anyone was behind him. They slammed into the side rail, tools scattering across the floor. The attacker kicked wildly, but he pivoted, using the rail to pin the man's arm and force him sideways. The officers rushed in to help. Within seconds, the second attacker was subdued. Breathing hard but steady, he looked down the stairwell where Miranda stood frozen halfway up, staring at him with disbelief, awe, and something deeper recognition of a truth she'd mocked only an hour ago. He didn't speak. He just stepped aside, letting the officers secure the man. The crisis was unfolding exactly as he'd predicted. But he knew something else, too. It still wasn't over. He descended the stairwell with the same controlled pace he'd used all night, leaving the subdued attacker in the custody of the officers. His movements were efficient, measured not triumphant, just focused. The second threat was neutralized, but the night hadn't eased. If anything, the silence settling over the service stairs felt heavier, like the building itself was waiting for something else to go wrong. Miranda followed him down each step, gripping the railing with trembling fingers. She didn't speak. She couldn't. Every question she wanted to ask felt microscopic compared to the scale of what she'd witnessed. She had mocked this man. She had dismissed him. She had called him weak, and he had just stopped a second attacker with his bare hands. When he stepped back into the lobby, the environment had shifted again, less frantic, but still unstable. Smoke had thinned to a faint haze. Guests whispered in tight circles. Children clung to their parents. Officers stood watch, unsure if they were guarding the building or helplessly waiting for more instructions. He scanned their faces. He could see the pattern of trauma-forming panic, frozen shock, small tremors of delayed fear. The longer people remained without firm direction, the higher the chances someone would make a dangerous decision. He needed to move them to safer zones before adrenaline turned to chaos. The head of security rushed up to him. "We secured the man upstairs." No device found, but he was trying to jam the emergency elevator override. If he'd finished, he nodded once. It would have triggered a drop, meaning anyone inside that elevator injured, panicked, hiding would have plummeted several floors. The director swallowed hard. "We owe you everything." He didn't acknowledge the gratitude. His attention had already shifted to the other side of the room where several guests were crying against a wall, unable to move. He walked toward them. A middle-aged woman clutched her teenage son, shaking uncontrollably. "Is it over?" she whispered. "For now," he said, "but we're not finished keeping you safe." His voice held that quiet authority people instinctively lean toward in crisis. Not loud, not dramatic. Solid. He turned to the officers nearby. "Split remaining guests into groups of 10. Move them to the banquet hall. It's the safest open space area with multiple exits." "But, sir," one officer muttered reflexively, "you shouldn't be giving the director cut him off. Do as he says." He didn't look back at them. He simply continued. Anyone with injuries above minor levels needs to be moved to the east corridor. Medics will enter through there. Keep the injured off the main lobby path. Officers began shifting into motion with newfound direction. This was leadership not based on authority, but on clarity. Miranda watched, frozen again, as he moved seamlessly through the room, stabilizing, guiding, checking corners, offering reassurance with nothing but words and presence. For the first time in her professional life, she saw what true crisis management looked like, and it wasn't something she'd ever learned in business school or board meetings. As he approached the banquet hall entrance, Noah, the boy he'd saved earlier, ran up to him, clutching his backpack. "Sir?" "Zeet, you said you'd come back." He knelt quickly. "I told you I wouldn't let anything happen to you. And I meant it." The boy threw his arms around him. He rested a steady hand on the child's back, letting him breathe. "You're safe now, Noah. Stay with the staff in the banquet hall, okay?" Noah nodded and hurried to join the others. Miranda approached slowly. You're incredible." Her voice cracked on the last word. He didn't answer. Not out of cruelty, but because he was already assessing the next movement pattern, the flow of guests exiting the lobby, the officers positioning themselves along walls, the faint emergency lights blinking in the corridor. She swallowed hard. Everything I said earlier, I didn't know. I didn't understand. Still no response. Her chin trembled. "You saved those people. You saved all of us. I misjudged you completely." He finally looked at her, not with anger, not even disappointment. Just calm, steady realism. "We don't have time for that right now." The words weren't harsh. They were truth, and somehow that hurt more than any scolding could have. Suddenly, a loud metallic clang rang from the far end of the building. Every head snapped toward it. A metal shutter somewhere deeper inside had slammed shut from impact or malfunction. He couldn't tell yet. He straightened instantly, body shifting back into alert mode. "What was that?" Miranda whispered. "Something heavy," he said quietly. "Let's move." Security officers converged around him again, waiting for direction like gravity pulled them toward him. He led them toward the source of the sound, the hallway near the utility wing. The shutter there had fallen halfway from the top, jammed and crooked. Behind it, a small crowd of guests was trapped, banging against it desperately. An officer swore. "We can't lift that without tools." He stepped forward, crouching to assess the hinge. "We don't need to lift it. We need to redistribute the weight and leverage the pivot point." He touched the lower bracket worm from friction. "Get me a metal rod or a broom handle," he said. A staff member sprinted away and returned seconds later with a sturdy pole. He inserted it into the crack near the hinge and angled his weight downward, not jerking, just applying controlled force. The shutter groaned. The hinge shifted. A gap widened. He nodded to the officers. "Pull." Together they lifted the jammed shutter high enough for guests to scramble underneath. One woman collapsed into his arms, sobbing. He steadied her with a gentle grip. "You're safe now." When the last trapped guest slid through, he let the shutter fall. The clang rattled the floor, but the danger below it was gone. The director exhaled shakily. "Is there anything you can't do?" He didn't answer. Instead, he scanned the lobby one more time, counting injured, counting officers, counting gaps. Sirens blared outside, closer now, louder. Miranda stepped beside him, voice soft. "Is it finally over?" He shook his head. "It's just begun." The sirens outside grew into a piercing chorus, their reflections flashing red and blue across the hotel's glass walls. He stepped toward the entrance, scanning the thinning smoke, the clusters of shaken guests, and the shifting silhouettes of officers who were waiting for first responders like students watching the arrival of a headmaster. The crisis had swallowed the building for long enough. Now it was time to shift roles from holding the line to handing it off. But nothing in his body relaxed. Not yet. "EMS is here," a security guard called out, voice cracking with relief. He nodded once, not in celebration but in acknowledgement. The presence of medics didn't mean victory, it meant coordination, and coordination meant precision. Too many people were still in unstable condition. Too many corners of the building remained untreated, and the threat, though neutralized, required containment. He'd seen disasters where late-stage chaos claimed more lives than the attack itself. "Open a clear path," he instructed. "Create a direct lane from the entrance to the triage zone." Security jumped to follow him, no longer questioning why he led. The head of security barked orders that aligned with his movements, and within minutes the cluttered lobby formed into a structured corridor, tables pushed aside, crowds moved to safe pockets, debris cleared as much as possible. Medics rushed in, wheeling equipment. He stepped aside, allowing them through, then guided one toward the injured woman from earlier. Laceration to the leg, possible glass fragments. Bandaged but needs irrigation and cleaning. The medic glanced at him, eyebrows raised at the efficiency of his report. "You a paramedic?" "Not anymore." Not wrong. Not entirely right. Enough to move the medic on. Another medic approached the man with the makeshift flashlight splint. "Who stabilized this?" He didn't answer. A civilian pointed at him. "He did." The medic blinked. "This is actually textbook. Perfect angle. Perfect pressure." The praise wasn't for him, it was for the patient. That was fine. He moved on. Miranda hovered a few steps behind him, watching everything unfold. She didn't try to speak again. Her earlier words, the cutting, careless insults, clung to her like smoke, and the deeper truth she'd been forced to confront sat heavy in her eyes. Not weak, not small, not lazy. He was the only reason the lobby wasn't a morgue. He approached the boy again, kneeling to meet his eyes. "How are you holding up?" Noah clutched his backpack tighter. Are you okay?" He managed a faint, tired smile. "Good enough." The boy threw his arms around him again, small body shaking. He held him for a second longer than before, grounding him, letting him breathe before gently sending him toward the banquet hall with a medic escort. As soon as Noah was out of danger, he pivoted back to the staircase where the second attacker had been captured. Officers were dragging the restrained man out, muttering under their breath about motives, accomplices, and charges. The director looked overwhelmed, blinking rapidly as if trying to process the scope of everything they'd missed. He approached the director, lowering his voice. "Lock the mezzanine. Restrict access to all maintenance hatches. And don't let anyone touch the elevator systems. They need full inspection before operation." The director nodded quickly. "Right. Yes. Absolutely." He was about to move on when two police officers entered from the side door, guns holstered but posture professional. One of them stepped forward. "Which one of you coordinated containment?" The director opened his mouth, then closed it again. Slowly, he pointed. The officer turned toward him. "Sir, we need a rundown of initial threat, movement pattern, injuries, and response. Your leadership prevented escalation. We'd like your statement first." He shook his head. "Tend to the building first. People need stability before reports." The officer hesitated. "Are you sure?" Usually protocol doesn't matter until they're safe." His tone shut down the debate instantly. Miranda pressed a trembling hand to her chest. She watched him as if watching a truth reshape itself in front of her. The man she'd once measured by career, clothing, and status now stood at the center of a crisis he'd quietly prevented from becoming a catastrophe. She stepped closer. "You've saved everyone in this lobby." He didn't answer. Instead, he surveyed the last clusters of injured guests, looking for anyone who hadn't yet received care. One woman was still hyperventilating against the wall. He approached her gently, guiding her through slow inhalations and exhalations until her panic softened. "You've done enough for tonight," Miranda whispered, almost pleading. "You should rest." He glanced at her. "Not until everyone's accounted for." "But that's not your responsibility." His gaze held steady. "It is now." They stood there, caught between exhaustion and realization. The emotional weight in her chest pressed harder, the shame of her earlier assumptions, the awe of the man he was, and the fragile gratitude that made her voice tremble. Before she could speak again, a paramedic called out, "We need immediate help stabilizing a child with a head injury." He turned immediately. Miranda watched him move, watched the determination in his stride, watched the way he didn't pause to question his worth or obligation. He was already kneeling beside the injured child, assessing vitals, directing medics on positioning, adjusting compression on a wound with practiced ease. Every officer, every medic, every frightened guest saw it, saw him. Not the maintenance uniform, not the mismatched dinner clothes, not the social status. Just the man who had guided them through hell and never once asked for recognition. When the medics took over fully, he finally let himself exhale, ribs aching with each breath. Miranda approached again, softer this time. "You've done more than anyone here. More than security. More than anyone." He didn't answer. He didn't dismiss her. He just stood there, breathing slowly, scanning the room as though danger could still be hiding behind the calm. Because crises didn't end when the alarm stopped. They ended when the last person was safe, and he wasn't done until that moment arrived. He stayed near the triage zone even after the medics took full command, arms crossed loosely, posture steady, eyes sweeping the lobby with that same relentless vigilance. The building felt different now. Not safer, not yet, but no longer on the edge of collapse. The worst had passed, but the aftermath had its own dangers: shock, miscommunication, hidden injuries, emotional spirals. He'd seen soldiers survive firefights only to unravel once the noise stopped. Civilians were no different. Miranda stood several feet away, watching him. There was no judgment left in her expression, only something rawer, quieter, a mix of realization and regret. She approached slowly, as though afraid to step into a space he was guarding. "You should sit," she murmured. "You're hurt, your ribs, your arm." "I'm fine," he replied, not unkindly, just factual. "There are still people who need help." "But you've already helped them," she insisted, voice trembling with sincerity. "More than any of us could have." He didn't respond. He stepped away instead, moving toward a man who was shivering uncontrollably, hands shaking too badly to drink water a medic had given him. He knelt, guided the cup to the man's lips, waited until the tremors eased. Miranda watched him with something close to awe. A police lieutenant approached then, clipboard in hand. "Sir, we need your full statement now. Your actions tonight prevented significant casualties. We're recommending commendation to the city." He shook his head. "Statements can wait." The lieutenant frowned. "I understand your humility, but this is critical information. And frankly, my team is saying you practically ran the response inside." "He did," Miranda said, stepping closer, voice steadier now. "You should have seen him before you arrived. He handled everything." Her tone carried weight, one of the city's most influential CEOs vouching for a hotel maintenance technician. But he still gave the lieutenant the same measured answer. "People first," he said. "Reports later." The lieutenant looked like he wasn't used to being told no. But he also wasn't used to being wrong, and tonight he clearly was. He nodded and backed away. He turned his attention back to the room. Medics were moving efficiently now. The injured were being stabilized. Officers guarded access points with a confidence they hadn't possessed earlier. Guests had stopped crying and started whispering the same word in small, reverent murmurs. Harrow. He didn't hear the word, but Miranda did. And each time she heard it, her chest tightened. A paramedic carrying a medical kit glanced at him. "You know, you could have been leading a trauma unit with those hands." His tone wasn't joking. He didn't respond. Instead, he noticed a small girl standing alone near the corner, her dress torn, eyes wide. She wasn't injured, but she was lost, no parent in sight. He approached her slowly, crouching so he was eye level. "Hey," he said gently. "Who are you here with?" My mom," she whispered. "She ran when the loud sound happened. I fell. I don't know where she is." He softened his voice further. "You're safe now. We'll find her, okay?" She nodded, tears clinging to her lashes. He guided her to the medics, ensured they'd help locate the mother, then stood again slowly this time. His ribs protested. His forearm throbbed from the earlier blow, but pain wasn't priority. Movement was. Miranda stepped closer again, unable to keep distance. "You don't stop, do you?" He didn't look at her. "Stopping gets people hurt." She swallowed hard. "Who taught you all this?" He paused, not because the question offended him, but because answering required opening a door he'd intentionally kept shut. "Experience," he said quietly. "That's not experience," she whispered. "That's training, real training. The kind you only get from something." Bertal, he didn't confirm or deny. He simply turned away when another medic called for extra hands lifting a stretcher. He moved with them, guiding the motion, supporting the injured man's shoulder to keep the wound from reopening. Miranda watched him work alongside police and medical teams as though he belonged there because he did. She had built entire companies, brokered deals worth millions, commanded boardrooms with ease. But she had never seen leadership like this. Effortless, compassionate, unselfish, performed without expectation of reward. And the more she watched, the more shame pooled beneath her ribs. She had mocked this man, mocked his clothes, mocked his job, mocked what she assumed was small ambition. Yet he was the reason everyone was alive. When he finally stepped aside, breath heavier now, she approached again, this time with purpose. "You're not a maintenance technician." He met her gaze. Calm, neutral, not defensive. "I work maintenance," he said. "That's not what I meant." Her voice cracked. "You were someone before this. Someone trained. Someone who saved people before tonight." He didn't blink. "Alongatimiagor." The truth sank in. Miranda's breath trembled. "And then you became this? A quiet job? A simple life?" His eyes softened not in vulnerability but in clarity. "My son needed me to be home, not deployed." The world seemed to tilt under that single sentence. A father, a protector, a man who had walked away from chaos for the sake of a child. Her throat tightened. "Your son, he must be so proud." He shook his head slightly. "He's young. He just needs me to show up." Miranda exhaled slowly, guilt pressing down like weight. "I misjudged you, completely, and I'm sorry." He didn't dismiss her this time, but he didn't absolve her either. Before she could say more, the police lieutenant called again. "Sir!" The press is gathering outside. "They want to speak to the person who prevented mass casualties." He turned to face the lieutenant, to face the choice of stepping into the spotlight or continuing to protect the people quietly. Miranda waited to hear his answer. He gave the same one he'd been giving all night. "Not until everyone is safe." And he moved back toward the remaining guests because leadership didn't end when danger passed. It ended when every last person had been carried out of fear. He moved toward the final cluster of guests, the ones who hadn't yet been guided out because they were too shaken to stand or too numb to understand they were safe. Police had created a buffer around the lobby, medics were finishing final checks, and officers were escorting families to the banquet hall exit, where buses waited to relocate them to a temporary shelter. The building was stabilizing around him, but he didn't let the tension in his shoulders ease. Not yet. A woman clutched her husband's jacket near the entrance, trembling as sirens flashed across her tear-streaked face. He approached her slowly. "Ma'am, can you walk?" She swallowed hard. "I think so. Good. I'll walk with you." He supported her elbow, keeping his steps slow until she reached the officers waiting near the exit. The moment she crossed into their care, she broke down in sobs of relief, and he gave the officers a nod before turning back toward the lobby again. The head of security jogged up beside him, breath still uneven. "The sergeant outside says the press keeps asking for the civilian leader inside the hotel. They want your name." He shook his head. "Focus on evacuations." "You can't avoid the media forever," the director insisted. "Your actions need to be recognized publicly. People saw what you did." He didn't respond. Recognition was irrelevant. Safety wasn't. He scanned the room once more, landing on a small cluster of older guests near the far column, seated, stable, but too afraid to cross the lobby floor. He walked toward them. One of the men lifted his head, voice shaking. "Sir, are we clear? It's really over?" "It's over in this room," he answered gently. "Let's get you out." Two officers stepped beside him to assist. Together, they guided the group across the lobby in slow, steady steps, careful not to rush them. Trauma wasn't something you pushed people through. It was something you carried them out of. Miranda watched from the base of the mezzanine stairs. She hadn't taken her eyes off him for more than a few seconds since the chaos began. Each gesture, each calm correction, each steady breath, each quiet reassurance stripped away another layer of the assumptions she'd built her life around. Power wasn't in wealth. Strength wasn't in titles. Leadership wasn't in boardrooms. It was here in the quiet, deliberate movements of a man who chose service over ego and responsibility over reward. When he finished escorting the elderly group, she finally stepped forward, blocking his path unintentionally. "Please," she said softly, "just give me a moment." He paused, not annoyed, not impatient, just present. She took a breath. "Earlier tonight, I said things I can't take back. But I am asking you please let me say them properly." He didn't speak, letting her continue. "I called you weak," her voice cracked, guilt pulling the words apart. "I humiliated you in front of strangers. And then you saved every one of us. Not because it was your job. Not because anyone ordered you to, because that's who you are." Her throat tightened. "I misjudged everything about you." His expression remained steady, but something in his eyes softened barely, but undeniably. She went on. People like me walk through life thinking we understand strength, thinking we know who deserves respect. But tonight, you showed me what real strength looks like. Quiet, steady, selfless. Before he could respond, the police lieutenant approached again, breath urgent. "Sir, there's a crowd forming outside. People who made it out earlier told reporters about you. They're chanting for you to come out. And the commissioner is asking for your presence at the perimeter." Miranda looked between them. "They want to thank you." He let out the faintest exhale, fatigue creeping into his posture at last. His ribs throbbed, arm aching, breaths growing heavier with each movement. Hours of adrenaline were draining out of him now, replaced by the weight of the night. But he shook his head again. "Not until the last guests are out." The lieutenant blinked. "We're down to the last group. 5 people still refusing to leave until they know the threat is gone." He nodded. "Where? Near the South Lounge?" He headed there instantly, Miranda trailing behind him. The South Lounge was dim, lit only by flickering exit signs. 5 guests sat huddled near the far wall, 2 women, a man and a teenage couple. Their eyes were wide, reflecting both fear and disbelief as he approached. "Are you all hurt?" he asked. "And no," one of the women stammered. "We just couldn't make ourselves move." "That's okay," he said. "You're safe now. I'll walk you out." They slowly rose, leaning on one another. He guided them toward the exit with unhurried steps. When they reached the officers outside, one of the women turned and whispered, "Thank you for everything." He nodded once simple acknowledgement and stepped back inside for a final sweep of the lobby. But before he could move again, a loud cheer erupted from just beyond the doors. Voices rising, calling out. A chant, not aggressive, not demanding, grateful. Miranda looked toward the entrance, eyes widening as more voices joined in. "They're cheering for you," the head of security approached, hands clasped behind him. "Everyone inside is accounted for. You're the reason." The police lieutenant stepped beside him. "Sir, the commissioner wants to address the crowd with you at his side." He stood there, finally still. This was the moment many people would step into to be honored, to be recognized, to let the world see what they had done. But he wasn't most people. He glanced at the last medic packing supplies, the last officer escorting a family, the last trembling guest hugging a loved one. Then he turned back to the lieutenant. "I'll come," he said quietly. "But only if you're sure everything inside is safe." The lieutenant nodded. "It is." He finally exhaled, letting the tension drain from his shoulders. "Then let's go." Miranda watched him walk toward the doors toward a crowd chanting for the man she once dismissed. And for the first time tonight, she felt the swell of something she couldn't ignore. Respect. He stepped through the lobby's shattered threshold and into the night air, where the flashing lights of police cruisers painted the pavement in alternating washes of red and blue. The cold breeze hit his sweat-soaked skin, but he didn't flinch. He'd walked out of many buildings after chaos-burning compounds, collapsed structures, evacuation zones, but this was different. This time, he wasn't leaving behind fellow soldiers. He was leaving behind terrified civilians who were alive because he'd refused to stand still. A crowd gathered behind police tape erupted when they saw him. Cheers, applause, voices calling out from every direction. He wasn't used to the noise. Praise had never been part of his old life, but he didn't react with shock or discomfort. He simply stood there, steady as ever, letting their relief wash over them rather than over him. The police commissioner strode forward, adjusting his cap. "You're the civilian who led the internal response?" He shook his head slightly. "I helped where I was needed." The commissioner smiled not dismissively, but with genuine respect. "You did more than help. You prevented a mass casualty event." He turned to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, this man saved dozens of lives tonight." Applause roared louder. He stayed centered, feet planted, gaze calm. For the first time all night, he let himself breathe a little deeper. Miranda stood behind the commissioner, hands clasped together, watching him with the same expression she'd worn since the moment she realized who he truly was. Not a look of gratitude alone. Something more complex. More human. The commissioner leaned in. "May I ask your name for the record?" He hesitated not to hide, but because his instinct was always to stay small. But staying small wasn't the lesson his son needed to see. Being steady wasn't enough. Sometimes truth had to be spoken aloud. "Evan Mercer," he said quietly. The commissioner nodded. "Evan, the city owes you." He didn't respond. He wasn't here for praise. A murmur moved through the crowd, a ripple of whispers. Evan Mercer, Evan, the man inside, the hero. He took a step toward the railing, scanning the dozens of faces, some bruised, some bandaged, all alive. Then he spoke, his voice steady but softer than the sirens and shouting. Everyone out here did their part tonight, he said. The medics, the police, the staff, the people who helped strangers get up when they fell. He paused, breath fogging in the cold air. Crisis doesn't care about status. It cares about actions. The crowd went silent. He glanced back toward the hotel's doors. What happened tonight, it's not about me. It's about how you protect each other when fear is loudest. Those words landed harder than any speech the commissioner could give. A moment later, Miranda stepped closer. She waited until the commissioner finished speaking to the press, then approached Evan slowly, carefully, as if finally understanding she was stepping into the presence of someone whose life measured strength by a different scale. She took a breath. Evan. He turned toward her, expression neutral but not closed. I owe you more than an apology, she said. You didn't just save me. You showed me who you are, and who I failed to see. He didn't soften, but the sharpness in his eyes eased. People say things they don't mean under pressure. That wasn't pressure, she whispered. That was arrogance, and I'm sorry. He gave a small nod, not forgiveness, not dismissal, just acknowledgement. She continued, quieter now. You said earlier your son needs you to show up. Tonight, you showed up for everyone. His gaze drifted toward the distant lights of the city. I show up because it matters. He needs to grow up knowing strength isn't loud. Miranda swallowed. Then he's learning from the right person. Silence settled between them, not heavy, not tense, just real. An officer approached from behind. Sir, we've swept the entire building. Your involvement is no longer required. For the first time all night, he allowed his posture to drop slightly, shoulders loosening. It was over. The crisis was closed. He turned toward the crowd again. The applause rose a final time, not demanding, not frenzied. Grateful. He took one last look at the hotel, the shattered doors, the smoke drifting into the night, the officers guarding families, the medics loading stretchers. Then he stepped back, slipping into the shadows beyond the flashing lights. Miranda watched him walk away, a strange ache tightening her chest. She didn't chase him. She knew this wasn't a moment to pull him back. Some people didn't need the spotlight. They just needed to know they'd done enough. And Evan had done more than enough. He walked down the quiet sidewalk alone, ribs aching with every breath, forearm bruised, clothes torn but alive. And somewhere at home, his son was safe, asleep, unaware that his father had spent the night carrying an entire building through terror. That was the only recognition he needed. As the night settled, his steady footsteps faded into the distance, leaving behind a crowd chanting his name, a city indebted to him, and a woman who'd learned what true power looked like. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Something big is coming next, trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?